this is so very Davos, right? Inflation, 8 in the morning,
Yes.
with our snow boots, having braved a lot of, the winter passage that takes you through Promenade. Madame Lagarde, thank you so much for joining us. We start on inflation, then we'll talk a little bit also about, a business and actually what drives you, because you're such an icon for a lot of females out there in the workforce. When you look at inflation, when you look at monetary policy, what's changed your mind on how quickly we could get a cut from the ECB?
When I look at a year ago in Davos, and when I compare that with where we are today, I see a slope downward, but certainly not a slope which is at target where we want it. So that's what we have achieved, I think, in a little over a year. Bring inflation back from where it was in October 22 at 10.2%, down to a 2.9% month-on-month December, and certainly with the prospect of keeping it down and further down, because our target is 2%, and we are, I would have said a year ago that we are determined. We want to get it to 2%. I would say to you now that we are confident that we will get it to that target 2% medium term.
Are markets too optimistic on interest rate cuts?
I'm not going to comment on markets. Markets do their job. They have their numbers. They have their objectives. What we do at the ECB, and what I think most central banks would do, is work as hard as we can collecting data, using artificial intelligence, by the way, for that, analyzing data, confronting viewpoints, checking models against empirical data, doing scenario analysis, and being as comprehensive as we can to anticipate what's coming. And it's hard, because what many people don't understand is that monetary policy works with a lag. So whatever we do now is going to have an impact in a few months, and sometimes a year or two. And we have to take that in account to decide what we do, how long we hold, and what decision we make in due course.
When you say that you gather data also with AI, does AI also analyze? Because again, you're looking at the current data, you're trying to forecast what your monetary policy is doing in the future. So is it algorithms? Like, how does that work?
We do data collection a lot. We don't determine monetary policy using algorithm and artificial intelligence. And I think that time we can check with the AI experts, of course, but I don't think that time has come yet.
When you look at, again, the forecast, and I understand you're not focused on the markets, but if the markets
price... It's not that I'm not focused. We look at them. We look at what they say. We are attentive. But everyone has their job. And we cannot, sort of second guess what they will think that we are thinking that they are second guessing. Yeah. I mean, it's a catch-22 job, right?
But if the market is too optimistic about cuts, does it actually hurt
They're
your
not helping the fight against inflation by doing that.
I was going to ask you that. So it makes your job harder if they're actually mispricing what you're trying to tell them.
It is not helping our fight against inflation. If the anticipation is such that they are way too high compared with what's likely to happen.
Is it too early to cry victory against inflation? How do you see it behaving?
We are on the right path. We are directionally towards the 2%. But unless and until we are confident that it is sustainably at 2% medium term, and we have the data to support it, I'm not going to shout victory. No, not yet.
How much is the inflation reduction thanks to your monetary policy, and how much of it is luck?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't call it luck. I think two factors have played a critical role, and it's the decline in energy prices that we have observed. Energy prices pushed prices up massively, and energy prices decline, of course, has a similar impact. So that's number one. Number two, the bottlenecks that we have observed as a result of COVID in particular, and which lasted quite a long time, has gradually faded out, and that also had an impact. More supply, more availability of goods. Second factor. The third factor is monetary policy. And it's undoubtedly been effective, if only to anchor inflation expectations, which we know is really important. So it has had an impact on inflation itself, but it has definitely had an impact on inflation expectations, which by all accounts and all surveys and all measurements have come down and are really now broadly onto that 2% medium-term target that we have. I know it's obsessive, 2% medium-term target, but yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, but at least it should guide the markets, right? I mean, it's good to be obsessed.
Well, if they don't know that that's what we are aiming for, then they need to have their head examined. That's for sure.
And then again, talk to me a little bit about wage bargaining. So again,
Yeah.
Is that going to be on the upside? And could that change, you know, the timing of a possible rate cut?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned wages in general, wage bargaining in particular. And I'll go to that. But I want to tell you that there are three things that I'm watching carefully. Wage bargainings, profit margins, energy prices, and hopefully not, but the coming back of supply bottlenecks. Those are four key components which could have a serious impact on the work that we're doing against inflation. But back to your wage question. Wages have gone up, but relatively slowly. So prices have gone up earlier and faster than wages. So we are now facing a moment of not only some degree of alignment, but catch-up as well. So employees have lost purchasing power in the course of 21-22. And there is now a catch-up effect in the bargaining discussions that are taking place. We will know a lot more probably in April, May, because the numbers, the bargaining agreements are being negotiated in the first quarter of every year. And the results come in after the agreements have been closed. So that gives us indication that we can, you know, corroborate and verify in the late spring, I would say, of 24. That will be a strong indication. Are wages slowly catching up, and that catch-up process will take place over the course of 2 or 3 years, possibly? Or is there a very strong catch-up coupled with an alignment with inflation, which would give me concern, because while we're not seeing today's second-round effect, that could be the result of this sort of twofold process.
And you think second-round effects, and this is one of the big debates within the governing councils, of course, do you think second-round effects are more likely than not, or is it really just wait and see?
It's wait and see. You know, we are trying to suss out every element that moves, if you will. So there is this Indeed index, which indicates how many new job offers are available, and it's artificial intelligence applied to it to see, you know, if it's up, if it's stable, if it's down. It's declining a bit. So this issue of multiple vacancies for few unemployed, that is fading out. When we look at compensation per employee, we're looking at backward data, let's face it. So when I talk about the 5.2% increase in per employee compensation, I'm talking about 2023. What will happen in 24 is going to be the really important data. But we are seeing little signs of at least stabilization. Mm-hmm. But I would refrain from making any prediction as to whether it is the wages are going to continue to slightly, the increase will stabilize and decline a bit or not. I want to see the data.
But are you confident that there will be a cut this year in interest rates?
I'm confident that short of another major shock, we have reached a peak. Okay? Now, we have to stay restrictive for as long as necessary to make sure that we get to that state where we are all saying, okay, confident that it is at 2% medium term. I know some people argue that maybe we are overshooting, maybe we're taking risks. I think the risk would be worse if we went too fast and had to come back to more tightening, because we would have wasted all the efforts that everybody has put in the last 15 months.
But this would be, again, economically, or also the trust in central banks? If you get this wrong, does it hurt the credibility?
Credibility matters. let's face it. When we say we will get to 2% medium term and this will happen in the medium term as we define it, if people believe in that, and they should, because we will do it, it matters. It is a component in the sort of chemistry that determines inflation going forward.
And again, so the timing is quite fluid, but there seems to be a majority on the Governing Council that expected probably by the summer, if not in the summer.
You know, and you've talked to some of them, they have spoken recently, and each of them has their view, which I respect completely. We generally coalesce towards the decisions that we make on the basis of data. Some of them have their local domestic data. They have their respective inflation rates, which are different from one country to the other in the euro area. Where, if you look at Portugal, if you look at Germany, it's going to be different, obviously. But it's their job to say, well, it's likely that. I would say it's likely too, but I have to be reserved because we are also saying that we are data dependent and that there is still a level of uncertainty and some indicators that are not anchored at the level where we would like to see them. And don't forget that services, for instance, is still cruising at 4% inflation. Services is the most sort of labor-intensive sector of the economy, and it's one that we have to bring down towards 2%.
The US election.
Yeah, let me have some coffee.
How worried are you about the US election?
It's for the American people to decide what they want with their politics, with their government, with their future. But obviously, we are all concerned about it because the United States is the largest economy, the largest defense country in the world, and has been a beacon of democracy with all its upside and downside. But this is what they should be considering. And of course, we cannot interfere with their choice. It's their choice, and that's the beauty of democracy. But we have to be extremely attentive and anticipate, just as we do with inflation. You know, we do scenarios. What if, what if, what if? Then what do we do? Because that's the real question. And you know, where I sit now in Frankfurt, head of the ECB, I think that we have to be strong as Europeans and not assume that we can rely on whoever our friends are around the world, because these things change over the course of time, as we have seen.
Yeah. So what if Donald Trump gets into the White House? What are some of the policies that Europe could be put in place to not be caught also between China and the US with Donald Trump in the White House?
Well, for one, it has to be strong of its own. And if I look at my own shop, because it matters to monetary policy transmission, I think that, and you will hear that from others, we have to accelerate capital market union. We need financing in Europe. There is a lot of saving in Europe, and we have to make sure that those savings actually stay here to finance what needs to be financed, which is predominantly the climate transition, which is digitalization, which is enough reindustrialization conducted with a targeted approach so that we can, in the key areas, be self-sufficient.
But are there policies that you would put in place now for Europe to, I guess, counter the US exceptionalism, which could be questioned going forward?
I think I would accelerate many of the initiatives that have been taken, and I would encourage European leaders to put aside a little bit their respective idiosyncratic differences to be more together, because it's a question of size and scale, and Europe is a very large market, has a very sizable population, has capacity to innovate, has financing. It has to, be a little bit more cohesive together and forward-looking.
Are you optimistic about 2024 as a whole? 2023 was better than expected economically, but now we have conflicts, we have much more tensions, climate change still one of the top worries as well.
With all due respect and thoughts and empathy and sympathy for the people who are suffering at the moment, and there are plenty. It's not just Ukraine and Gaza, it's in many other corners of the world as well. But I'm constantly surprised by the level of resilience and the capacity to actually bounce back from those traumas. So I have faith in the human beings and their capacity to to respond to adversity. We've seen it. You know, look, earlier in the pandemics, we thought that the world was coming to an end, right? It hasn't. Nobody thought that vaccines would come up in such a short period of time. And every time we have to constantly resurrect this spirit of resilience.
But is there something that unsettles you? We have a lot of elections, so not only the US election, I think 50% of world GDP
including in
citizens,
Europe.
including
the whole of
in
Europe will go to vote, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's impossible to predict, but what's your gut telling you?
It's impossible to predict, full stop.
Are you hopeful that...
I'm always hopeful. Oh, come on, we have to be. We have to be.
Is there
we have to speak up.
Is there a lack of trust? So Davos, you know, it's all about rebuilding trust.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the most lack of trust, do you see? Is it between citizens and the people at the top? Is it between countries? Is it between regions?
If you look at surveys, if you look at those who are trying to understand, who do soul searching and who brainstorm about it, it seems clear that the family is the cell level where there is the more trust. So that should tell us something about proximity. And I think that whenever in policies we can emphasize proximity and the capacity of people to actually have control of their destiny and be able to discuss it, I think we should select that route rather than the sort of, you know, top-down approach. Do as you're told.
You were one of the first female, of course, top lawyers in a US law firm. Then you ran the IMF, you were a French economy minister, now you run the ECB. What do you think makes your success? What kind of, you know, advice, I don't know whether it's resilience or something else that you could, you know, wisdom that you could impart with people watching?
To young people, I would say, first of all, have big dreams, embrace them, but most importantly, respect other people and bind with them, work with them. You know, you don't succeed on your own. You embrace a project, you share a vision, but then you encourage people all along, and the more they shine, the better.
But a lot of people are afraid of that, right?
Afraid
if your
of what?
Well, if your team shines, then you shine less. Is this something?
That's done.
But you must have encountered people. You must have encountered people that have said that. I mean, what kind of, like, how do you deal with difficult personalities?
Very difficult personality.
Yeah.
Horrible people.
Yeah.
The little knife. Out.
What karma? So no time.
The really difficult ones,
Yeah.
Because the not so difficult but difficult one, you can manage. You can bring them along. You sit down with them. You talk them through. You understand what is their perspective. But the real, the little knife.
What do you do on a bad day? I mean, do you ever have a bad day, actually, where you say, because you're very optimistic and you try, you know, and this is what we hear also in the corridors of power, that you try and bring people along, that you try and kind of motivate. What happens to Madame Lagarde on a bad day?
I go for a walk and I think of my grandchildren.
And they give you hope?
Of course. Yeah, very much so.
So are you hopeful?
See, you sort of, you draw on your inner strength, you go back to the family circle, you think of what duties you have to them, and it pulls the best out of you then.
For as far as I remember, you've been a champion of women. Are you disappointed that we haven't done more, that women haven't gone further in business, or?
First of all, I see more and more women succeeding and making the case that of course they can do the job, of course they can do sometimes a better job. But it's an endless battle, and it's one that we have to continue fighting together, men and women, aligned.
And do you see that happening? I mean, there are a lot of initiatives. It seems that, I guess the concern is that you do have some women at the top, they're far between. Mm-hmm. But then you don't really have, I guess, the next generation.
You know me, I'm a very strong supporter of quotas, targets, and checking, what progress has been made. It works, and it has to be in place, and it has to be supported, because it's going to improve the game for everybody. It's not going to put men aside. It's not going to promote women only. It's going to be good for all.
Do you still have that list?
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of people know about the list, but basically, if someone's looking for a high female businesswoman to hire, or for a central bank, you say, "Oh, I actually have a list."
No,
right?
no. They said, "Oh, I've looked everywhere. I couldn't find a competent woman to take the job." And I said, "You know what?" Yeah.
So everyone should have a list.
Yep.
Madame Lagarde, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.